So now we are going to apply what we have learned during this task to some arguments. That means we're going to be pulling together not only stuff that you learned during Unit 1 about argument analysis, but we're going to be applying stuff that you learned about statements in the context of ethics or thinking about and being curious about whether a statement is assigning a moral value to something or not. In this document, you have two arguments that from the standpoint of logic and ethics are what are called properly constructed moral arguments. I'm not going to lecture on that in this class, but if you would like to learn more about properly constructed arguments and what the basic recipe is for a properly constructed moral argument, I encourage you to take my class in the fall because I'm really into that topic. For right now, I just want you to know that I'll let you know which two are properly constructed moral arguments because they have all the ingredients, and I'll give you the ingredients. I'm just not going to lecture in depth on those. So what I recommend then is to get more practice with respect to what you learned during Unit 1 and to get more practice with respect to keeping your skills sharp. You might want to go ahead and apply everything that you've learned to Argument 1. I'm not going to do any lecture or teaching. I'm just going to go over answers. And this is going to include attention not only to things, skills, concepts, ideas, methods, and principles that you've already learned, but the new concepts as well. So I'm going to continue assuming that you have taken my encouragement to try this on your own. I encourage you to then try the next one after I go over the answers, and so forth and so on. Okay, so I think that wearing a mask shows you are considerate of others. We know that that is statement 1. We could cross out the excess verbiage. That is the word think. Then we have, thus do I believe that I'm a good person. I would do the opening bracket around the word I, and then, of course, the closing bracket after person. If you have the opening bracket here or here, that's okay because you keep the statement intact if you start with I, but you also can include the full statement, thus. You can see that what I'm doing is I'm not bracketing the conclusion indicator or the hedge. It's okay to do that in this case because I don't destroy the integrity of the statement by not bracketing this part. Okay, so as I already indicated, this is a conclusion indicator and this is a hedge, so we would cross both of these things out and this would be labeled as a what? A conclusion. When you look at statement 1, and of course you would have said that this is statement 2, so you would have bracketed and numbered this as statement 2. When I use my basic college level reading skills, I understand then that S2 is thought to follow from what? S1, meaning that S1 must be a premise. However, I see that they're not done with their reasoning, the speaker, because they go on to say, because I wear a mask. So another statement is right here. So statement 3 is, I wear a mask. So because would be crossed out, and here it's functioning as a what? A premise indicator. However, I see that this person still isn't done with the reasoning. I notice after all, and I immediately remember that the lesson and the iteration during week 1, I look at my notes to confirm, and I see, yes, after all we were warned about is in fact a premise indicator. So they're continuing on with their reasoning. Considerate people are good persons. So this would be bracketed as statement 4, and then you would cross out after all. And this is another premise. So this is a simple argument. It has one conclusion and 3 premises. If you were to reformat this, of course, statement 1 would become premise 1, statement 3 would become premise 2, statement 4 would become premise 3, and statement 2 would be listed as the conclusion. Now, there would be, whether or not we can apply uniform language, I'm not going to get into that because that's not the emphasis here. What I want to focus on is identifying any statements that are moral and any that are non-moral. So I encourage you to try this on your own if you have not done so that you can figure out what you do understand and what you don't understand in an active, truly engaged way. Assuming you have done this, let's go ahead and take a look. So I think that wearing a mask shows you are considerate of others. This is just describing an approach, an attitude, or a demeanor of someone who takes a certain action or does a certain thing. It's not saying that being considerate is good or bad or right or wrong. Therefore, we would say that this is a non-moral statement. Okay, then here we have, I am a good person. So that's definitely a moral statement because goodness is being assigned to a particular individual that the speaker is referencing as themselves. I wear a mask. That is a non-moral statement. Nowhere in the statement do you see any words indicating that a moral value is being assigned. There's nothing about it's right to do so, it's morally required, one ought, one should, it's the morally correct thing to do. Nowhere in that statement do you see any kind of language as such. After all, considerate people are good persons. This is a moral statement. So, we have two non-moral statements and two moral statements. Let's break it down just a little bit more. Look at what this one says, statement 4. Considerate people are good persons. Isn't this assigning the moral value of goodness to an entire class of people? That is, the entire class of people who are considerate? It is. You look at your definition for general moral principle, you can see that this is a moral statement in the form of a general moral principle. What about our other moral statement? I am a good person. Is that assigning a moral value to a specific individual? Yes, it's assigning the value of goodness to which individual? The speaker, him or herself. So this turns out to be a properly constructed moral argument. Properly constructed moral arguments will have a moral premise that functions as a general moral claim or principle. It'll have a premise that's a non-moral statement and a conclusion that is a moral statement that is a particular moral judgment, and that's what this argument has. It's even more clear if you reformat it, but I'm not going to do that. I want you to be able to see this in its ordinary. I want you to be able to see these features of this reasoning in its ordinary form. So this is what we would call in philosophy a properly constructed moral argument. Note that while I said it should have at least one moral premise and one one premise that is a moral statement in the form of a general moral principle and at least one premise in the form of a non-moral statement, a moral argument that is properly constructed can have any number of premises. So it could have a ton of non-moral statements. And indeed, a well-supported argument that concerns a contemporary moral issue will probably have a lot more non-moral statements in the premises section than it will moral statements. We'll get more into that later. Okay, so let's look at this example. Try it on your own if you have not done so yet. Apply everything that we have learned. Okay, assuming you've done so. The N95 mask will help to slow the spread of COVID-19. So that's a statement, bracket it and number it with 1 at the beginning. Because it filters out deadly viruses. So statement 2, bracket it, closing bracket, viruses. And then statement 3, opening bracket. We all know that the Rona, in here, I'm going to correct that real quick, has killed so many. So that's statement 3 in brackets. Notice that this time I included excess verbiage, but that's okay as long as I cross it out. So we've got statement 1, 2, and 3. So there's really nothing to do with this statement here. But then I look at statement 2, it filters out deadly viruses. I see the indicator word because. I remember that because typically functions as a premise indicator. And so I decide, at least preliminary wise, that this is probably a premise that is taken to support the first statement, a conclusion. Then it seems like not only is because having scope over statement 2, but that it also has scope over statement 3. We all know that the Rona has killed so many, so that is likely to be another premise. Of course, you would know how to reformat that. That would be statement 2 would become premise 1, statement 3, premise 2, statement 1 would become the conclusion. Notice that here you would apply uniform language while reformatting. It filters out would be replaced with the N95 mask, and then we all know that. We would want to cross that out because that's what? Excess verbiage in the form of an assurance. We'd also cross out and, don't need that. We'd cross out what? Because, premise indicator. Now that we've labeled the statements, we don't need that. And then Rona is slang, right? So when you're clarifying arguments, you do want to take out slang. And really what they're referring back to in terms of uniform language is what? COVID-19. All right, so what about the new concepts? Look at statement 1. Do you see any words talking about wrongness or goodness, rightness or evil? Do you see any of the words that I told you typically, but not necessarily indicating immoral values being assigned to something? No. It's just a claim about some kind of device and what it helps to spread with respect to a virus. But nowhere is there any kind of moral value being assigned in statement 1. So that would be labeled as a non-moral statement. And in fact, you can put the statement right here. So I would have 1 premise. So I'd have 1 P and then NMS. Here I would have 2 and then what? It filters out deadly viruses. Does it say anything about it being right or wrong? Do you see those words? Do you see any words indicating moral values? You have to go back to a previous lecture where I gave you a table of words that typically, right, more often than not, or very likely, are telling you that there is a moral value being assigned, but there isn't. This is just claiming that something's true about reality without assigning a moral value to it. So this would be a what? This would be, sorry, and I shouldn't have said premise here. This would be 1C for conclusion, non-moral statement. This would be 2 bracket, and then it would be premise, and then non-moral statement, or NMS. And then what about this? Rona has killed so many. Again, there's no evidence of any moral values being assigned to anything. Therefore, this would have been 3 brackets, and then this would be statement 3, P for premise, and then NMS, non-moral statement. So this is an argument, like many arguments, and perhaps most arguments out there in the world, that is non-moral. This is a non-moral argument. When I say moral argument or properly constructed moral argument, the goal of a properly constructed moral argument is to offer reasons in support of a particular moral judgment, to argue that some action really is some particular action or particular instance of an action really is right or wrong, or that some unique or specific individual really is good or bad. That's the point of a properly constructed moral argument. This is not the point of this argument. It's not trying to advance a particular moral judgment. It is just stating some facts about a virus and a device that can slow down the spread. Up here, we did have some premises being offered specifically to support the particular moral judgment that this person is a good person. That is right here. So statements 1, 3, and 4 all aim at justifying this particular moral judgment here, and this particular moral judgment is taken to be supported by 2 non-moral statements and 1 moral statement. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at one more argument. If you have not done so, I encourage you to practice this on your own and then come back for the answer. Okay, so public institutions have a moral obligation to keep their students safe from harm. Statement 1, because Dallas College fully opened its campuses. I'm going to put this additional detail, which you should have if you downloaded this as a document in summer. So then the statement is Dallas College fully opened its campuses in the summer. So that's statement 2. I'm cutting it off. So there's an afterthought, but it seems like important information, so we're going to include it. Allowing as many as 50 in one classroom with less than 3 feet between any 2 individuals. So I'm going to do that as a closing bracket right there. So, sorry, it was wrong of the college to do so. So then statement 3 is going to be right here. It was wrong of the college to do so. Okay, so what are my clues? Well, I have the word because right here. Because typically tells me a premise is coming. So statement 2 turns out to be a big, long premise all the way to right there. And when I use my critical thinking skills and my college level reading skills, I understand from reading comprehension and what I've learned that statement 2 is a premise being offered in support of what? Premise 3, the conclusion. It turns out then, as I look at this paragraph again, that statement 1 is also being used to advance statement 3, the conclusion. So this is a premise as well. So this would be statement 1, a premise, statement 2, a premise, statement 3, a conclusion. What would we cross out? We cross out because, and then we cross out anything else? I don't think so. Okay, so now let's look to see, let's apply our new terms. Public institutions have a moral obligation to keep their students safe from harm. Moral obligation, as you know, is cited as a indicator phrase, right? It is moral, or it's an obligation. We're obligated to, this kind of combines them, those two terms. A moral obligation, in other words, it would be wrong if we didn't do that. So yeah, this is a moral statement, but not simply due to the fact that it has these words, but because these words are being used, in fact, to assign a moral value to talk about the rightness or wrongness of a certain action. And what is that action? Keeping students safe from harm. Okay, what about statement 2? Dallas College fully opened its campuses in the summer, allowing as many as 50 in one classroom with less than 3 feet between any two individuals. Do you see any words or phrases saying that any action is right or wrong, or that any persons or class of persons or specific persons are good or bad, or that any instance of an action is right or wrong? No, there's no moral terminology in here at all. So this is a non-moral statement. So what about this last statement right here? It was wrong of the college to do so. Definitely, again, the word wrong in and of itself does not guarantee that the statement is a conclusion. We have to read the whole sentence and make sure that wrongness is being used to assign a moral value to an action. And it is, when I use my critical thinking skills, I see that wrongness is being assigned to which action? Doing so, which is what? Opening its campus in the summer and allowing as many as 50 students in one classroom, blah, blah, blah. So here we have statement 1, a premise, a moral statement. Statement 2, a premise, a non-moral statement. Statement 3, a conclusion, a moral statement. So let's go back to statements 1 and 3. Which statement in this argument is the general moral principle, and which one is the particular moral judgment? This one says that public institutions have a moral obligation to keep their students safe from harm. So the action being discussed here is keeping students safe from harm. Does it say which students or who? No. It is just a general claim. It's about a wide category of actions, and that is any action that could keep students safe from harm. And what this statement is saying is that we have a moral obligation to engage in these kinds of actions or behaviors, keeping students safe from harm. Those are the actions to take that are morally required. It would be wrong if we didn't do them. So this is about a wide category of actions, or is referencing a wide category of actions or behavior that would keep students safe from harm. But then look at statement 3. It was wrong of the college to do so. So here, when you employ uniform language, you would write all of what is in statement 2. It was wrong of the college. Of course, here you would replace the college with what? Dallas College to do so. And like I said, you would replace that with all of statement 2. So here you can see that a moral value is being assigned to the action, the specific instance of an action that Dallas College failed to take. They failed to keep students safe from harm, but how did they do so specifically? They opened up the campus. In other words, they created a harm by doing this. So this right here is a particular moral judgment, and this would be considered a, a properly constructed moral argument. Don't worry about whether you fully understand what a properly constructed moral argument is, but do know that arguments 3 and 1 are properly constructed moral arguments. Statement 2, there's nothing wrong with the argument. It's a non-moral argument. This argument could be used as part of a complex argument to support a particular moral judgment that we have an obligation to purchase an N95 mask, or that we are morally obligated to buy N95 mask. So we could incorporate this as part of a complex argument as non-moral premises, as our non-moral statements in support of, in addition with a general moral principle to advance a conclusion about the rightness or wrongness of wearing masks. But as it is, this is just a non-moral argument by itself.